Hello everyone, so today we're going to be looking at Ainsworth's strange situation. I'm following along with the AQA psychology textbook for A-level year 1 and AS with the green haired girl on. So the things you need to know and be able to recognise, I've included your AQA specification point, which is Ainsworth's strange situation, types of attachment: secure, insecure, avoidant, insecure, resistant. So these types of attachment are the ones that are identified by Ainsworth, and we're going to be looking at the behaviours that we would see infants showing under each of these different types. Now, in terms of the exam, a question may specifically ask you for the procedure or the findings, or it could ask for both. So you need to be really careful when you interpret a question on Ainsworth's strange situation. And I've also included a revision technique, which I don't think many of you will have thought of before or used before, which is quite unique for Ainsworth's procedure, and I find that it really does work. It really helps you to remember it quite easily. So first of all, we're just going to have a look at the aim of Ainsworth's research. So Ainsworth conducted her research in 1978. This is a female researcher. So her aim was this: to observe key attachment behaviours to assess the quality of a child's attachment to their caregiver. So this is the technique that I use to remember this procedure. As you can see, I've got three pieces of equipment, stationery. So I've got three different highlighters on these pictures. I have a big pink one, a small pink one, and a big green one. So I personally use these and position them in different places on a table, and any of you can do this, and put a little tab at the top so I know exactly what's happening. And you can do this even like with anything. So I just think that this works. So if I look at the first picture, which is child and caregiver enters an unfamiliar playroom, you have to imagine that you're around a playroom and that the mother is the big pink one and the child is the little pink one. So they've just entered together. You look at the next one, the child is encouraged to explore. So the big pink one tells the child to go and play with the toys, for example. And what sort of behaviour is that testing? So you need to know what behaviour is being tested each time. So if you're being told to tell the child to go and play with the toys, for example, it's testing their exploration and secure-based behaviour. How are they going to act when they're asked to behave independently? So that's what that's testing. You then have a stranger enter the room and it tries to interact with the child. So that's why I've now got the green highlighter, which is my stranger, coming into the room as well. So that's testing stranger anxiety. And then the caregiver, which is that big pink one, leaves the child and the stranger together. It's testing separation and stranger anxiety. The reason we're testing separation anxiety is because the caregiver has now left. If we look at the next picture, we've got the caregiver returning and the stranger has left. So it's just the caregiver and the baby together again. So it's testing reunion behaviour, how that child interacts and responds when the caregiver returns, and it's also testing exploration secure base. The caregiver then leaves the child alone, so you can see I've now got a single highlighter, the baby pink one on its own, the child is on its own, and that tests separation anxiety again. Then we have the stranger returning, so it's testing stranger anxiety. And finally, the caregiver returns and is reunited with the child, so it tests reunion behaviour. And as you can see, you can do this yourself with three different things, anything in front of you, and it really does consolidate that understanding of what happens at what particular point, because it can be difficult to remember these steps. Now in your textbook it says there are 7 steps to the strange situation. Here it looks like there are 8. That is simply because I've included child and caregiver entering an unfamiliar playground as the first step, but the textbook doesn't do that. The textbook starts with the child is encouraged to explore. So just have that in mind. So a little bit more on the procedure details. It is a controlled observation. So you've got researchers in a room observing the caregiver and the infant and the stranger and how these interactions happen, what sort of behaviours the child is showing. Now a two-way mirror is used, so that's whereby observers are in a room behind this mirror and they can see into the room that the caregiver and infant are in, but the caregiver and infant just can see themselves in that mirror. They cannot see who is behind the mirror. So to them, it doesn't look like anything different. But the observers can watch them. So the infants and the caregivers don't know that they are being watched. So there's unlikely to be any sort of change in their behaviour because they don't feel like they're being watched. There are 7 episodes in the procedure, as I was saying, and each episode in that procedure lasts 3 minutes a time. So each of those 7 episodes, they're all 3 minutes individually. So we now have some key attachment behaviours. So all these behaviours are being looked at in the strange situation, and it's something that we're very interested in. So we have proximity seeking, and that's wanting to remain close in terms of the contact with an attachment figure. The infant wants to remain close. Proximity is how close you are to something. Exploration and secure base behaviour, this is being tested. We want to see how the infant shows behaviour when they are independent and they can go and explore, in terms of going to explore the room, the different toys that are there. So there feels that there's this sense of safety to explore. The infant feels like it's safe to do so. We have stranger anxiety. So this is the distress that is shown by the infant when they are approached by an unfamiliar person, so it's not their primary attachment figure. You also have separation anxiety. So this is the distress shown by an infant when they're separated from an attachment figure. So they're apart, they're not together, not in the same room. And you've also got response to reunion. So this is how the infant reacts when their primary attachment figure returns back to them. They're back in the room with them, how they respond in that situation. So we'll now look at the findings. So you can be specifically asked for the findings of Ainsworth's strange situation. Now, in terms of secure attachment, this is a type B. So the way I remember these different types, firstly, is insecure avoidant, avoidance an A. So therefore that must be type A. Secure attachment is the best, so that has to be type B. And insecure resistant is the other one, so it's type C. Now, in all sorts of studies that have been conducted, we tend to see type B as being the highest. So in Ainsworth, we have 66% of infants showing a secure attachment. That is the most frequent one. Okay, and insecure avoidant, we have 22%. So that always sits in the middle normally in research. And insecure resistant is the less typical one, and we find 12% of infants showed this in Ainsworth's research. Now, if we look at the sort of behaviours that they show, with secure attachment, we will see that the infant will explore regularly all around the room, looking at different things, but will go back to their caregiver also as well. So it's not massively that they just want to avoid them, they want to go back to them and have some comfort. They will show moderate separation and stranger anxiety, so it's not massively extreme. They will require and accept comfort from their caregiver at the reunion stage as well. In terms of insecure avoidant, they show little reaction when their caregiver leaves, and they make little effort to make contact with them when the caregiver returns. So in terms of the caregiver, they will leave and they'll come back, but the infant doesn't really notice. They're very avoidant, so they try to avoid them in a sense. That's how I would think of this. And these children explore freely, so they just play around. They don't really bother for any comfort with the caregiver as they are there, or they leave. They just aren't too interested. And in terms of insecure resistant, we have infants seek and then reject social interaction. So they want a lot of interaction. They go and say and maybe cry a lot. They want to be comforted. And when they try and get comforted by the attachment figure, they reject it. So they say, no, start crying, don't want it. And they respond to separation from the caregiver with intense distress, but they also resist that comfort when they are reunited with their caregiver. Now, comparing differences between attachment types is something that you need to understand as well. This table in the textbook is very useful. These are all the different behaviours and the 3 different attachment types. Now, in terms of comparing differences, you need to be comparing in terms of the behaviours and not the types of attachment. So this is very important because you don't want to get confused over this, because there can be an exam question. Now, I've got a 4-mark question at the bottom, and what I want you to do is outline 2 differences between an infant with a secure attachment and an infant with an insecure resistant attachment. So if you look at the table above, you can compare these by the different behaviours and use that sort of method to say, and you've got 2 marks for each one. So you want to be comparing twice, okay? Now we've got our AO3 evaluation marks, so support for validity. Now, the strange situation in terms of attachment type is defined very well in terms of it can predict later development very well as well. So the babies assessed as secure typically go on to have better outcomes in many areas of life. So if you take part in the strange situation and your baby is identified as having a secure attachment, it is likely that in terms of their life, they will have better relationships, they'll also have better educational success, that type of thing. And that is because it is very predictive of later development. And also, insecure resistant attachment is associated with the worst outcomes. So that includes things like bullying behaviour. A lot of kids that are bullies, shall we say it like that, they have these insecure resistant types, unfortunately, and this is sort of very predictive behaviour. So what we see from very young, it predicts that later behaviour. And also it leads to potentially adult mental health problems, as found in research by Wardell there. So therefore we can say that the validity of the strange situation in terms of assessing the attachment type is very good. It's very high because it is very predictive of later outcomes, and it can explain subsequent outcomes as well. The strange situation also has good reliability. So we're going to talk here about inter-rater reliability. Now, what we mean by that is having 2 different observers, maybe even more, rate the attachment type that they see in front of them. But they are separate, they're not communicating with each other to discuss what they think, they're separate, and they rate the behaviours. And when they compare their results, it is very likely that they agree with the same attachment type to classify the child or the infant that they're observing. And this may be because the strange situation takes place under strict controlled conditions, and because, as you've already seen, there are all those behavioural categories that they must observe, and it's easy to observe them because they're so explicit, they're quite obvious, they're not I'm not sure which one it would be, it's very understandable. So we've got some research by Bick et al. In 2012, and those researchers looked at inter-rater reliability in a team of trained strange situation observers, and they found that agreement on attachment type was correct in the saying that we had one observer and another observer agree 94% of times when the babies were tested. So therefore we can be relatively confident that the attachment type of an infant does not just depend on whom it is that observes them. However, we do have a limitation in that the test may be culture bound. So the strange situation may not have the same meaning in other countries as it does in Western Europe and the USA. Ainsworth is an American researcher. She based it off the Bowlby's theory in terms of that being a UK theory. So it's very Western Europe sort of studies these are, and it's because other cultures have different rearing practices, and also caregivers in different cultures behave differently in the strange situation. So this is why it might be culture bound. So we've got some research by Takahashi in 1990, and that research noted that the test does not really work in Japan because Japanese mothers are so rarely separated from their babies, and as a result they show high levels of separation anxiety when they are. Now, if we were to test in the UK and USA, the mothers are separated in the sense that mothers tend to not be with their babies all the time. But in Japan, that is not true. So they are very close a lot of the time. It's very rare that they would be separated. So when they take part in the strange situation and they are separated, it's a very unfamiliar sort of thing for them, more so than it is in the UK and USA. And also, Japanese mothers rushed to their babies to scoop them up when they returned to their babies, so it's very hard in that sort of sense to observe the child's response. So therefore the strange situation can be said to be culture bound, as it doesn't travel well to different cultures. Another limitation is, well, what does the strange situation measure? Are we measuring attachment type or temperament? And now by temperament we mean genetically influenced personality type of the child. So it's something that cannot be changed because it's a genetic thing. But in terms of this, we're interested in what is it that's being measured, because Ainsworth put forward the idea that this is measuring attachment type, and the strange situation measures a child's response to the anxiety produced by being in an unfamiliar adult environment. But is that main influence of the anxiety attachment, or is it something else? The way that we're responding to the anxiety, is it because of the infant's attachment, or is it because of their temperament? And that's where we're a bit muddled. Okay, so Kagan in 1982 suggested that temperament is actually more important in terms of its influence on behaviour in the strange situation than attachment is. So temperament may be a confounding variable. It may be confusing us. So are we measuring the temperament, or is it the attachment type? So it's something that might be getting muddled in the sense that it might be testing that when we think it's actually testing attachment type. So here we can say that the validity is challenged, as if the behaviour in the strange situation measures is also affected by temperament, then it does not purely measure attachment. And finally, a further limitation is that there is at least one more attachment type. So Ainsworth is putting forward that there's 3 attachment types. We've got the secure, insecure avoidant, and insecure resistant. But we have Main and Solomon in 1986 who argue that a minority of children do not display behaviours typical of either type A, B, or C attachment. So instead they argue that there's this thing called disorganised attachment, and that is a 4th attachment type they suggest. And it's whereby children display a mix of resistant and avoidant behaviours. So Ainsworth's strange situation is still useful. It can assess the types, but this is a problem for Ainsworth because she only identified 3. And it's now widely accepted that there are at least 4 attachment types that can be identified using the strange situation. Okay, so now we've just got some past papers to look at. This is from a Specimen A-level set 1, paper 1. So you have an item here and you've got 3 different children. So you've got to say what their attachment type is by looking at the scenario and picking it out, okay? So a nursery school worker and her manager were chatting at the end of the day. How did the new toddler settle in today? Asked the manager. They behaved very differently, replied the nursery school worker. Max was distressed when his mother left, but was happy to see her at the end of the day. Jessica arrived clinging to her mother, and I could not calm her down when her mother left. William barely seemed to notice when his mother left and did not even look up when she returned to collect him. So with this item you can label it, but I'm hoping you can see that Max has a secure attachment, William has an insecure avoidant, and Jessica has an insecure resistant. Okay, there's your mark scheme. You can even put it as type B, type C, type A, in terms of you don't have to actually say secure or insecure, resistant, insecure avoidant. We've also had this question come up. So this is AS paper 1, June 2016. Discuss the strange situation as a way of assessing type of attachment. 12 marks, so this is the highest you can get on an AS paper. Discuss meaning describe and evaluate. You need AO1 and AO3 marks for this. It's an equal split because it's an AS paper. that plan your answer box there, use that, really be clear on your different attachment types, get the procedure correct, try and use the method that I was telling you about in terms of using 3 different pieces of stationery to really embed that into your mind about how the strange situation operates. Here's your different levels. You've got to distinguish between 4 and 3, I would always say, because it's where students struggle to get into the top band because they've had some inaccuracies or too many in order to get into the top. You need to make sure your discussion is effective, so you're describing and you're evaluating. And remember, there is minor detail and expansion is sometimes lacking even to get into level 4. So you just need to make sure that you're being clear and concise in your evaluation and your description. So this is your content and possible discussion points. This is just all the things that we've been looking at. It's quite a nice question, this, because it's very clear in what it wants you to do. You've also got credit other relevant material, including any references to procedure as used in replications and variations of the Ainsworth procedure. There are a few variations you can use, so as long as you've got Ainsworth research up there, it is fine, as long as it's relating to that strange situation. Furthermore, we've got AS Paper 1 from June 2017. Identify 2 infant behaviours that are characteristic of an insecure resistant attachment type. I'd say that's quite nice. That's AO1. You've just got to put down the behaviours of insecure resistant. And that's what we've been looking at. So on your mark scheme, you can see here high or extreme stranger anxiety, high or extreme separation anxiety. Those are the 2 I would think of more quickly, shall I say. And then you've got also explore less, more clingy, things like that. But also look here on the bottom of the mark scheme, it's saying if that there is more than 2 distinct behaviours given, you've got to mark and only credit the first 2. So if you put down 5, you can only have the first 2 that you've written. So this question is from an AS Paper 1, June 2018. So 3 one-year-old girls were taken to nursery by their mothers. The girls each reacted differently towards their mothers as they left. Bavi ignored her mother. Ola appeared a little upset. Pippa did not want her mother to leave and was very upset. The girls also responded differently when the new nursery worker approached them. Bavi was not at all upset. Ola was moderately anxious, but Pippa was very anxious. So in terms of this, you've got to be picking out here in the question, identify the most likely attachment type of the 3 girls. And you've got to use that information provided to help you. Now, you don't need to be writing lots because it's just 3 marks. You just want to be putting down the attachment type of each of the girls. So in terms of this, Pippa did not want her mother to leave and was very upset. But also when you look at later on, Pippa was very anxious. She can't have a secure attachment, so she must have an insecure resistance there. And you've also got Bavi was not at all upset. In that instance, you would expect it to be insecure avoidant, and Ola was moderately anxious. So that's a secure attachment. You've also got briefly outlined the behaviour each girl is likely to display when her mother collects her from nursery. So just be clear and know what you've got. There you are, you've got Bavi with avoidant, Pippa resistant, and Ola had the secure attachment. And if you look at the bottom, you have Bavi is not likely to approach mother, Ola is likely to greet her mother enthusiastically, Pippa is likely to seek and reject her mother. Okay, thank you for listening. I hope that's helped you, and best of luck with the rest of your revision.